Zero Parades for Dead Spies launches tomorrow. It's Steam Deck verified and it's from the same studio that made Disco Elysium. That last part is the thing most people care about, and I'll get into that briefly, but I'm here to answer the question if this game is worth it on the Steam Deck. Zero Parades is a narrative spy RPG from Zaum. If you played Disco Elysium, you already know roughly what that is. Isometric, text-heavy, dialogue and skill checks doing the heavy lifting instead of combat. In this game, you play as Herschel Wilk, a burned-out spy recalled for one final assignment in the city of Portofino. Before we get into it, I know there's been a well-documented controversy surrounding Zaum. Several of the key creative figures behind Disco Elysium, including the lead designer, were pushed out of the studio a few years back under circumstances that a lot of people, myself included, found pretty troubling. I'm not going to pretend that didn't happen, but this review is looking at the game on its own terms. What's here, how it plays, and whether it's worth your time. So we're not going to get into that whole controversy. Out of the box, Zero Parades is a strong candidate for a really great game, but with a caveat. The writing is very sharp, the world is well constructed, and Portofino feels like a real place with its own history, its own tensions, its own mess, its own people. The spy thriller angle gives the game a different feel from Disco Elysium. It's more focused, I think less unhinged, although there are moments where Zaum can't quite help themselves, but whether that's a problem depends on what you're actually looking for. The Disco Elysium comparisons are going to follow this game everywhere, and I don't think that's going to be entirely fair. I think this is a different game with a different protagonist and a different story. It does share the same DNA, the dice rolls, the skill checks, the internal voice system, and if that style of RPG clicked with you before, I think it will click here. I think you will love this game. On the flip side, if Disco Elysium wasn't for you, then Zero Parades probably isn't going to be either. This is a slow, text-heavy game, there's no action to fall back on, you're investing in the writing and the world, and if that investment doesn't pay off for you early, it's not going to suddenly change. I've put around 3 hours in it so far, and I'm into it, and I'm exclusively playing it on the Steam Deck, and I think it's gonna be a great platform to enjoy it. Let's move on to performance. One thing that stood out immediately is the in-game frame rate options. You can select a 45 or 90 FPS cap directly from the settings. Now most games give you 30 and 60 and then 120 and they call it a day. Having 45 built in is really thoughtful for Steam Deck users. On the graphics side, there are 3 presets: low, medium and high. That's it, you can't really change any other graphical options. Now in my testing, the performance difference between them wasn't that dramatic. You don't have that kind of gap you would see in a more demanding open world game, and the recommendation here is pretty simple: leave it on high. There are some heavier areas, the market district in particular. It will dip into the 45 to 50 FPS range, so capping it to 45 and leaving quality on high is what I recommend overall for this game. You're not really giving anything up and you get a pretty stable target. There's also a solid set of visual options beyond those graphical presets, so stuff like character outlines, text speed, text size, high contrast mode, even a dyslexic friendly font. I think the defaults are pretty fine for the Steam Deck, but it's good that these options are there. The game also has full controller mapping customization as well. So in terms of performance, there isn't really much I can say. However, there is one thing worth flagging right now: there is some hitching in some specific outdoor areas, so you're gonna see the FPS drop even below 45, particularly in the market districts. And Zaum have acknowledged it's a known issue. It's noticeable, but it's not constant, and hopefully it should get patched pretty soon. That's just something to be aware of going in. If you guys are finding this breakdown useful, consider joining my Steam group and curator page. The curator page is where I share my tested notes across a range of games on Steam Deck, and it can help you make a choice about a game before you buy it. Now on the OLED Steam Deck with a 45 FPS cap, battery life comes in at around 2 hours and 45 minutes. If you drop it to a 30 FPS cap, that jumps to around 4 hours and 30 minutes, and that's a pretty big difference. And this is the type of game that can be enjoyed even at 30 FPS. It's not a game where fluidity matters the way it does in, for example, a racing game or a shooter. Most of the time you're gonna be spent reading, making choices and watching conversations play out. 30 FPS doesn't hurt that experience, and if battery life matters to you, I think 30 FPS is a pretty good option. Now, if you do want the best of both, I also tested Lossless Scaling on this. It's not a game where I usually recommend it, but if you cap it at 45 FPS, and then you use lossless scaling to push the output to 60 FPS, battery life will come in at around 4 hours. So you get a smoother visual experience and you're not burning through the battery the way a native 60 would, so I think it's a nice balance. Separately, this game is also a very good experience on my Odin 3 emulated via GameHub. I limited it to 30 FPS and then used FrameGen to get that to 60, and I did enlarge the text, which helps a lot on the smaller screen. However, it's still kind of hard to see some of the world details on a screen this small, so it might not be for everyone. In conclusion, Zero Parades for Dead Spies on Steam Deck or any handheld is a pretty good experience. The game runs well, the text scaling works properly on the handheld screen, and the in-game 45 FPS option shows the developers actually thought about handheld platforms. 30 FPS if you want the battery, 45 FPS if you want the smoothness, and lossless scaling if you want both. If narrative RPGs with heavy text and little combat are your thing, I think this game belongs on your Steam Deck. And if you guys enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like. If you hated it, leave a dislike and let me know what I can do to improve. If you're into Steam, Steam hardware and gaming handhelds, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.